not buy it, then...
We're agile, we can experiment, we can try it again.
Exactly. All right, with that, thank you very much for your time. I will look to Michael, who's going to talk about quality Ruby code.
Thank you very much, Sean. All right. Immediately seeing my videoing is challenging. All right, quality Ruby code. I've thrown in a couple of screenshots from Goth screenshots, which are always fun. Please know. And when you write applications, please don't do that kind of thing, right? All right, thanks to the Boston RE organizers. Thank you, Sean. Thanks to all the other folks that are helping out. Thank you again to EasyCater. Good sponsor makes a huge difference. When their sponsor goes away, I've been at other meetups, all of a sudden you really miss them. So we really are really grateful. We don't take it for granted. Thank you. And it shows what a good company they are when they sponsor events like this. Maybe you should work for them. I'm going to thank all my friends in Indianapolis. Stacey, Aldrin, Ben, Bella, Joe, Adam, Adrian, and Orlando, who are probably going to eventually see this video. So hi guys. And I'm going to thank every person here for coming tonight, supporting the community. It's often easy to sign up. And usually at meetups, only about half the people come because we all go through that in our head.
Down.
Sorry?
Because the red line.
And the red line was down, so even bigger efforts were made today. So it's greatly appreciated. And we don't have a community unless people come. You know, I mean, it's kind of like everyone counts, like every vote counts, kind of that way. My talks are intended to be interactive. Ask questions, wave your hand, call out Michael if I'm not, looking at you at that point. And hearing your opinions and experiences is very welcome. I'm just one guy. I do like to have questions, answers, conversations during the show, not after. We do have a little period after as well. And I do polls to learn about what everyone is using, so I may just throw out some questions. Look around when I'm doing a poll because it's your chance to learn what your community is doing as well. And cell phone and laptop use during main talk is discouraged, so I'm going to pretend while I'm using my phone to take out my phone and put on airplane mode. Please do that, because I am recording. Someone did that for me the other weekend, and I was like, oh, and then I looked down, and it's like, yeah, actually it is on, and you are recording, so thank you. Airplane mode. I am recording video, but I'm recording this way, so you won't be on camera, and if you don't want your voice to be recorded, just let me know and I can stop it, and I won't question why. But first, something I had mentioned last time that I wanted to show, which is Docker. Because I went to DockerCon recently, and I saw this really neat thing called Labstop Play with Docker. Has anyone else used this? Just getting an idea. Okay, we've got one person. So they got an interactive site here, which hopefully is going to start. Didn't work last time, but I think we're good. So they provided a web interface here, which is pretty nice, and I can start creating instances in the cloud. And the session one, as you can see on the timer, will last for about 4 hours. And what I've got here is, I know this is the only live typing I'm going to be doing, so hopefully it won't be too painful. You can go to one of these servers, and you can copy this thing here, and then you can CD into
Is everybody familiar with Docker? Or is there anybody who was not? You're not? Okay. Do you want to go into a little bit of?
Yeah. Docker node ls.
We talked about this last month, but this part was broken, so.
Right. So I'm intentionally not explaining a lot, but I will circle back as best I can. Let me try that, because I'm not going to explain Docker. I'm just giving you just a tiny little taste that this is available. And it's up for you to go and play. So I just did something, I want to do a thing in Docker called Docker node ls. Don't worry about what it is, but I got an error. And then I tried to do something else, Docker swarm. I'm trying to create a new swarm of servers, and I got an error on that. And it's a little bit hard to show, but in trying to show it like this. But basically, with this playground here, you can create a bunch of instances, and you can hook them all up together, and you can create a swarm, you can create a bunch of servers, you can have masks on it, you can do whatever you would do like in a real production environment with Docker. You can get practice doing that with a bunch of servers with Play with Docker. And the reference here that's on the slide, so it'll be available afterwards, is this particular link, dockercon19.brettfisher.com. That will go through with Play with Docker, doing all of the operations to create like a production server farm, just slide by slide, and you can do it right there in the browser. I think that's really cool. I just think that's really cool. All right, back to the purpose of today. Okay, so while we're talking about deploying code, this came up last time. There were quite a few questions about actually deployments itself. Not so much about application development, but about deployments. A lot of folks recently have been getting into Docker. So to go back to it, Docker is a different way of doing virtual machines. It's a much more lightweight way of doing them. It's kind of hard to. A 101 Docker is kind of hard.
On the spot, I couldn't explain it either.
Yeah, but it is basically like a virtual machine. You know, it works in a different way, and what it will let you do, for instance, is create a runtime environment locally that's going to be the same as what you deploy. So you move away from all of those, works on my computer, works on his computer, doesn't work on this thing. Your actual deployment is the same as you're going to have in production, which is just an amazing. When you get that and you see it, you're like, oh my God, this is a big thing. This is really a big thing. But there were a lot of questions last time, so I started to look around, and Chef was pretty big about 5 years ago. Ansible has come out in the last few years, and then there's Terraform, and then there's SaltStack, and there's Puppet, and there's CloudFormation, and oh my God, this area seems to be exploding. And they've all got slightly different approaches. Here's their little stickers that you would get. Which one do you think is the coolest? Docker one. Why? Because it's the whale. I kind of like the Terraform because it's kind of like an angry alien thing. And isn't this kind of like the board? The cube, right? So it's infrastructure as code. It's the hot thing. There's different names for what you put together with the different products. As you would somewhat expect with Chef, which has got knives and kitchens and all sorts of stuff. You've got recipes. With Ansible, you've got playbooks, like football. Everyone's got their own names and their own little ecosystem that they create. A lot of it is basically about programming. I've called it programming configuration via a DSL. It's a term I just came up with. And it's kind of strange how you have to do some of the things. For instance, when you're using Chef, it doesn't have an if-then-else structure. It just doesn't have it. It's not a programming language. You're programming through an interface. But you can set this count attribute, and if you set it to 0, it doesn't do that block of stuff. So you can actually build a very simple like if-then-else's kind of structure. It's very strange. When I first read it, I didn't get it. And so I had to go back to page 1, like, how is it doing this? It's a little bit strange when you're programming through a DSL. But the whole idea, the hot thing these days is it's idempotent, it's immutable infrastructure. Set it and forget it. Those who are older will know the Ronco barbecue reference there. See if I can see anyone smiling at that one. Set it and forget it. But they have a different way of getting there, these different products, and I think perhaps the simplest way to describe it is the older products. They can all often do the same things. There's a lot of overlap. But the older products like Chef, it tends to be, I've got this configuration set up here and I want to change it, and I want to run a script on all of the servers to change it and get to the new state. The newest tools, the Terraform style tools, are more like, we're going to build everything from scratch every time. Like if we need to change something, we're not going to go in a script and change it, because now we've got that server might be in a slightly different state if we're applying patches that way. We're going to replace it with a new server. So that's kind of one of the big concepts that's going on. If you're getting into this stuff, if you need to know about infrastructure as code because you're doing real production deployments at your company, you've just got to learn about it. You've got to learn like what is the key factors. You know, Docker has a daemon. Ansible doesn't, uses SSH, port 22. There's a lot of security issues you need to know about with that. And you just got to educate yourself. And I can't recommend do more than just read and read and read. Checklists in this deployment area, I think, are a very good idea. If you're getting into it for the first time, or one of these technologies for the first time, you're like, well, what should I do in Ansible? have a checklist. It'll help you out a lot. And it's a hot topic. I just went out and looked on the web. Why use Terraform, not Chef, Puppet, Ansible, tool stack, or CloudFormation? Preparing DevOps tools, Docker versus Kubernetes versus Puppet versus Chef versus Ansible. The IBM ones tend to be pretty good, so I put that one there. Gruntworks also, and then there's a couple of blogs here. There's a GitHub gist, and there's a post on Reddit. But as you can see, a lot of people are asking this question. So often when someone posts something, it might not read well for you, but with this many ways of reading it, I think if you read all of them, you better have the big picture at the end of that. All right, that was a little side excursion. Back to quality Ruby code. So as a quality engineer, which is what I am, I'm always thinking about, well, I used to be always thinking about more tests. Hey, more tests is great. The more tests we have, the better it is. That doesn't actually work out that well. So now I'm thinking about better tests. Think about the value those tests are adding, not just that I'm adding tests. So we can have less bugs. Okay, just less bugs can be gained pretty easily, as it's become known in the industry. So let's talk about having higher quality for our end users. Because if we don't focus on the right thing, we end up solving the wrong problems. For instance, we might have a code base, your application, and it's got some bugs in it. So we add tests, because we know that's a good thing to do, right? If we want quality, we've got to have tests. Now we have two code bases, and both of them can have bugs. It's like if you want a standard, people say if you want a standard, say for SQL, you come up with a standard, and then next person walks into the bar and there's another standard on the wall. So we have two code bases if we add tests, and our overall code may be twice as hard to maintain, twice as hard to fix. I mean, when I say twice, that's in big quotes, 3 times, 1.5 times, 10 times, whatever it is, because we've got these two code bases. So just adding tests hasn't solved the problem, because tests reveal issues with quality, but just having them does not improve application quality in itself. And it's obvious when you say it, but it can be forgotten in some organizations. What's the big picture? So we need to address quality issues in the code itself, both the automation and application codes. So in all our code, we need to do all of these things. Now, I'm just going to be touching on these two highlighted ones here. The quality code approaches. Part of that, I'll be talking about robust exception handling. But in addition to those, other areas that I'm not going to go into today, KPIs. Oh boy, they're getting hot in the industry. It seems like every company is coming up with its key KPIs to drive progress forward. But unfortunately, folks are coming out with like number of tests and number of bugs KPIs, which again can be gained. I encourage people to look for code level KPIs. There are tools you can run, metrics you can come up with, standards you can have that are about the quality of the code. Doesn't tend to come from the business a lot, depending on how technology savvy they are. So you yourself may be the person that's promoting having those kind of KPIs. You should have automated linting and Rubicop, code grading and code climate. Those are pretty well-known tools at this point to make sure that your code has got the right syntax and to tell you for the grading, the quality of the code in a number of different ways. And I'm not going to go into those, because I feel at this point the Ruby community is somewhat mature, and those are things that you just have to do. They're not like best practices or recommendations. It's like you've got to be using a linter. So I'm not going to go into that today. The other things I'm not going to go into is open-minded code review mentality. That's a huge thing for me. I'd love to talk about maybe a whole talk on that, or maybe a lightning talk. And along with a code review mentality, you've got to have easy to use code review tools. All right. So getting further along, I'm not going to talk about tests, but I'm going to get to has less bugs, and these are the topics I'm going to go through. Okay, so the first one was that your code is molded. And I'm going to now touch on a healthy code review process. Code is owned by all, and this second one is a big one for me. Like PR comments are the norm, and I think that varies a lot from company to company. Some places there usually aren't comments, and other places that's the rule that there will be comments. I've worked in places where, or at least in one place where it was absolutely the rule. There were a lot of comments. It went on for like a couple of weeks on a lot of the pull requests. And it was good. It was healthy. It was how we got quality code, and after a while, I became much more, took my ego out and said, let me get something that works and throw it over the wall. Let me not polish. See, the problem is when you polish it up, when your pride gets in the way and you polish up your code that looks really good, you're less likely to want to change it. So the way that I've gone with that is get it working, throw it over the wall, start getting all of the input from everyone else, and use that to mold it. Don't think you've got the solution. Think you've got a suggestion. So it's hard because we want people to care, but not have too much ego. There's a tension there, I think, between the two of those, right? Quality is not generally time boxed. Well, it kind of is often time boxed, but it should not be generally time boxed, I would say. And sort of that humble stuff I was talking about there. You've got to really be proud of the code, regardless who put it in. If you've got a bunch of people working on it, you've got to have that approach. And refactoring for me, I'm one of those folks that says you got to do it in cycle, you got to do it now when you spot it. It's a different way of working. If that's not how it was done in your company previously, it's one of those like when people didn't used to do tests and then they had to start doing tests. It's a completely different way of working, but it's what I recommend. All right, naming. Two big problems in computer science: naming, premature optimization. So use good names. Yeah, the IJKN thing is easy to avoid, but it's still every time I'm programming, I start doing like, the final size of the thing, the max limit, the number of items. It's very easy to get sloppy, but they don't add a lot in a lot of cases. It would be better to say, okay, it's the number of current order items. Okay, now I've got some context. When I have a bug, when I have a failure, at least I've got a clue about what it's supposed to be, although it may not be. Here's another one. Kind of speaks for itself. Have folks seen this one before? It's a fairly famous meme. WTFs per minute. Imagine you sitting there and like, what the? I think we've all been there, right? Starting to hear that, right? So that's another, a little bit sarcastic. The only valid measurement, nothing like a bold statement, right? All right, good code is kind of a words ahead of all of these slides, which is good code. Handles exceptions. So the first time I ever saw exception handling was written by a member of this community who's not here tonight, and I won't mention his name. And it was literally this. He just did rescue end. I looked at it at the time, was like, I don't know about that. That seems a little scary, but I didn't know any better. So I just kind of said, okay, that's fine, I'll move on. I've learned since that that's pretty bad because it would rescue everything. It's very generic, it's way too generic. So what you want to do is you want to scope things down. For instance, if you've got some code and you just want to get out of it, you could rescue, or if you had an error in the code, you could rescue standard error and let other errors continue. I'm not explaining it very well, but let me give another couple of examples here. So here we've got some code, and if something blows up anywhere in that code, there's a standard error. We rescue that, we do some other stuff, and if the condition still exists, we can continue to raise it. So that's why we captured the error when it was rescued here. So that's getting a little bit more sophisticated now. And then you might get even better and say, okay, I want to do a standard error with an argument error, a very specific kind of error in the error tree, which I'll show you in a second. And then again, you want to rescue the most specific exceptions possible. I think that probably makes sense. You don't want to just throw a big net out there and have all sorts of other things, memory errors or whatever, just bubbling up. And sometimes with exceptions, you just want to do a retry, and that's built into Ruby. For instance, I've got an API here that gets some price information, and it's getting socket errors. So I got a little retry loop here, very, very simple. I'm not even using a gem or anything, just tries equals 0 and just loops around, and then it just does a retry. That sort of approach is usually going to happen when you've got something like a dependency, or you've got like real live network connections, or a database you don't control that's behaving strangely. Because usually, like in unit testing, you're not going to have those weird, uncertain conditions. You should know what your code does in unit testing. So it depends on what kind of testing you're doing as to how appropriate it is to do something like a retry strategy. I'm doing a lot of capybara web interactions, and there's a lot of errors there that happen there, so it's a good thing to catch. So this is an example. This is a second example where I'm rescuing capybara element not found and net read timeout. But you've all seen, anyone who's done any capybara has probably seen both of those. All right. Raise them well, those little exception children. Raise them well. So if you raise, this is actually the example I saw someone do. You could just raise text like that. That would be like the most brute force way to do it. Okay, but you'd be better off just raising a runtime error. That would be more specific and it would be more helpful to someone who's trying to debug what happened. And you can just create custom errors. So you can just inherit errors from standard error, create a new class, and inherit from standard error. And now you could do like raise payment error and give a text, which is even more specific. And in fact, you can even like pass in parameters. So if I have another one here, temperature error, which would inherit from standard error, when I create a new temperature error, I can pass it 1A, I can pass it a number, and it'll have an attribute to handle it, and it'll show it in the error. So that's kind of nice. Method missing. Who's used method missing? Anyone here use method missing? Yeah. What did you use it for? Can you? You can remember.
Yeah. Usually when you're doing a domain-specific language, it's going to introduce something that someone thinks they have the right spelling for, or the right, and so you just go right to the method missing and say, did you mean blah blah blah, that kind of thing. Or,
yeah, I think I used it or thought of using it in a page object scenario, where I'm going to have all those different page objects as methods actually on an object, but one of them might not be there and I might want to add it. I don't like it. Yes?
Proxy objects. Wrappers which, wrap around some other object and log the method calls or something.
Nice.
Although, that's a technique for, that's an implementation technique for those. Although, if there's something specific you're doing, explicit delegate is sometimes still better style.
Right. Yeah, I've seen it like thrown out there as like a magic thing. Oh, just use method missing, and in a lot of the cases where people think of using it, I think there's a better way to do it. It's kind of sloppy, but opinions will differ vastly on that.
how could you implement RSpec without method missing?
Well, how could you do Ruby on Rails, perhaps? Like, it uses a lot of that kind of, yeah.
A lot less than it used to.
Yeah.
The Rails 2 style find by foobar methods. Now it's find by hash. It's the exact same amount of typing, no method missing magic.
Right. Interesting. Nice. So I haven't had a good experience with it, but I'm not saying that you won't in the right situation. I feel people throw it out, makes everything feel better. It's a Swiss Army knife that can tear your code apart, from what I've actually seen. It can also lead to highly opinionated programmers talking at you, is my experience with it. You've got to use it for this thing. Okay, enough of that. All right, so this is almost impossible to read, but the built-in subclasses of exception are, I didn't know this probably till about a year ago, because I just haven't taken the time, to formally, read the Ruby book on this section. But it's good. It's actually good to know. Like, most of them are a standard error that covers all of these here. You might want to catch a standard error, but remember it'll catch your argument error while it's doing it. You might not want that. So it's just good to take a moment to look at that. At the top level, this is probably actually readable to the crowd here right now. These are the top 8 kinds that you have. And most of the time, standard error is really, that's this one here. Most things are under standard error. So just knowing about those exceptions and which ones you might want to catch depending on what kind of code you're doing, and it all depends. It's so situational about how you handle exceptions, because if it's really critical thing that's supposed to happen, maybe you just let it blow up. Maybe that's the appropriate action. You don't just want to have clever strategies to catch everything if the user can't then continue with the data they need in front of them or something like that. All right, so to go into some more coding stuff, this book that I read recently, I liked a lot. I've looked at 4 or 5 Ruby books recently that are out there. There's not that many in the ecosystem at this point. This one I found very readable. I personally found this very readable, very easy to relate to. And some of the lessons I got out of it, so I got a big list here. So hang with me. This is going to be a little bit, I don't know what the term is. All right, treat all objects as if they could be nil. I think most of the people who've been doing Ruby for a while know about the nil. You don't have a method, or you can't do anything on something because it's nil. So and a lot of this around this area of better coding in Ruby is about defensive programming. It's also been termed that. So anything that comes in, could be nil. Pay attention to warnings. If you haven't done it before, you can run Ruby with a -W flag on it to show you deprecation warnings. And you don't do it usually, but every now and then you might want to do it and say, oh, right, it's going to give you some clues as to things that aren't good. Prefer set and struct to array and hash for some structured data. For instance, who here has used set? Good. All right. It's basically like an array, but it is unique. So you might see some code that has an array and it does all this stuff to make it unique. Actually, it would be .unique. It wouldn't be that much stuff, but you could just have a set. And there's also 2 set from an array, say. If you just tried it right now, it didn't work because you have to require set at the top of your program. It's not the standard library or whichever way that goes. But it's just require quotes, set quotes, and then you're able to use it. And then there is using struct over hash. So if you have a hash and it starts to really grow, it gets hard to, it's a little bit hard for me to describe. It gets hard for you to know what your values are without looking at the initial instantiation of it. Whereas if you use a struct, you can actually treat it as an object that has attribute names with getters and setters. I don't know if I've explained that very well. I'm still working on that a little bit personally, if anyone else has a better explanation on that one. Okay, and you get instance and class methods with a struct, so that's pretty cool. So another thing you can do, that's kind of cool, was you can use module. You can use it for a scoping purpose, not so much as a module, as a mix-in, but as a scoping thing to avoid unknowingly reopening classes. Like if you're doing something for a school information system, you might have classes, and you don't want to have to create another word like R classes or some weird way to get around the fact that if you actually opened up, remember, Ruby is an object, is an open language. When you say class, you're opening up the class, which is also, that gets very complicated, how many levels of abstraction you have there. But what you can just do is you can just put your class inside of a module. Just right like that, and then include the module. And then you've got that name scoping where you usually use like the double colon to do that name scoping, say like module name, class name, and that's all you need to do. Just put it inside something, and now you've scoped it yourself. Prefer class instance, so like self.name as a method, or the class name capitalized dot thing over class instance variables. Does anyone know why? This is a little bit obscure, because I've read this before and I hadn't really got it.
There's an inheritance problem. When you modify it on the subclass, it changes everywhere, rather than just on the subclass you're returning.
Yes, if you're using the class variables, and you've also got something which inherits from that class, they're both going to be hitting the same thing. Whereas if you use a class instance, you won't have that problem. I think I got it. It took me a while to get that one. All right, just a little thing, you may know it already if you learn how to use reduce inject. You always want to pass a parameter. It's a little bit strange. The case is if what you're doing is empty, Because if you don't pass a parameter, reduce and inject will use the first item in the array in the enumerable object. But if the enumerable object is empty, you get an error. So it's just a little, and you might not expect, when you're writing the good case, oh no, I'm getting that thing. But on that sad case, if you don't do this, again, these are all places where over time your code can blow up. And if you want to have higher quality code that's not going to blow up over things like this, those are the kind of things you need to think about. Manage resources with blocks and ensure, you may not have used ensure, it's part of that exception handling or block handling, to make sure that you close off database connections, file locks, things like that. Prefer throw catch, because it'll actually keep the last value that was in the iteration. Say if you're doing an iteration to raise rescue, which you're dealing with, you're already immediately dealing with exceptions. I haven't explained that very well. One of the ways that I got around not liking method missing was in certain cases you could use define method and you could use metaprogramming to achieve what you were trying to do. And simulate determinism with mock objects. Particularly like I'm almost doing these capybara web checks, testing, and you get all sorts of weird problems with HTTP, like not being available for one reason or another. And so you can simulate that. You know, you can make sure that your test handles, you know, like the network's down. So you want to do that. And then the other one is memoize for expensive operations. You may be familiar with that. Any opinions on that one? On whether that's a good thing, or whether you've used it a lot?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's a trade-off. It can definitely save you time. It can also complicate tests unless you have some explicit mechanism for dumping the memoized state.
Right.
You know, or you know, so you know, in my code base, this leads to a lot of tests that just that just refetch an object out of active record or do something else to reconstruct it in order to make sure the memoized state, you know.
Yeah, yeah. That's what I got stuck with a little bit with state. You have to be a little bit thinking a little bit more carefully. Like if you've got a before, you know, and you've got a bunch of test cases and you're doing the memoization in the before, you've really got to start to think about what that's going to imply.
There's one more thing with memoization.
Yes.
If your value can be nil, make sure you account for that, so that way every time you don't reevaluate the expensive operation.
Oh, good one. Good one. Nice. Yes, definitely. All right. And prefer local over instance. This was just a little tiny thing that I read. Look, I've still got my things here. I wonder if I can do IRB. No, I can't. Let's go with IRB. Let's go with a new terminal. So let's see. If I try to look at this variable.
Can you pump it up a little bit the size?
Yeah. Oh, the height of this?
Command plus, I think we'll do it.
Oh, sorry, the font size. Sorry. I should know. I have the older eyes. All right. So, yeah, if you just do something like this, you get a nil. It's not a problem. But if you have a variable like that, it blows up. It's kind of